Hi, everybody. It's February 2022, and this is episode 2 of Redefine Your Struggle with me, your host, Amy McCann. And on the screen, if you're listening, we have guest Pavita Singh today. She's an author. We're going to dive deep into her latest and first book, right, Pavita, that you've published? That you're going to love. I know this topic is suited for everyone. If you can see on your screen, she is a beautiful woman, and she has also become my friend. We met originally as through a friend, right? Isn't that how we met? And
Correct.
She became the editor of my first book back in 2018, Persevere to Succeed, which some of you may have read. This podcast is all about working together to make opportunities out of our obstacles. And those obstacles can, of course, be anything from uncertainties to fears, to doubts, to insecurities that we have in this big thing we call life. And Pavita is just such a perfect guest in this month of February, I feel, because here in the US, we celebrate Valentine's Day. And Valentine's Day is a chance for all of us to express our love for those we are closest to. And I believe if we look at it differently, we can also express greater love for ourselves in order to love those around us more effectively. And so with that, I want to read just a quick bio on Pavita so that you know who she is and how wonderful she is. And then we're going to dive into this conversation about emotions. Pavita is a polymath whose mission is to spread light, love, learning, and laughter, and leave some sparkle wherever she goes. Her interests include mental health, education, youth empowerment, gender equality, languages, and creative arts. Pavita is the executive director of Girls Health Ed, the director of content and communications at Conversi, and project manager and editor at Publish Your Gift. She also has her own editing business, which I spoke about. Her writings have been featured in HuffPost, Elephant Journal, and Medium. Pavita studied at Yale University, where she received her master's in, social and behavioral sciences, and New York University, where she received her Bachelor of Arts in Gender and Sexuality Studies, Linguistics, and Child and Adolescent Mental Health. She revels in creation, exploration, movement, connection, relaxation, wandering, laughter, and time with family and friends. Pavita has been to 38 countries and 25 US states and lives currently in New York City. Her book is entitled To All the Magic in Me. It is her first book, as I said, and it has, there she is on screen. If you're here with me, you can see she's holding it up right now. It's such a lovely, lovely book. It has had such an impact on me in really getting back to how important it is to connect to our emotions. And before I ask you some questions here, Pavita, I just want to say or ask my listeners if they are in a position where they do everything they can to avoid negative emotions. And with that, I would love for you to introduce to us what this book is about, how it relates to our relationships, and this topic of love in this month of February.
Absolutely. So thank you for that awesome introduction. I'm beyond flattered. I think you are way too kind. So To All the Magic in Me is a poetry collection about mental health, emotions, and self-care. And the subtitle is actually a collection of love letters to all of life's emotions. So the premise behind this book, I think all of us can relate to this, that we go through life trying to avoid negative emotions. And that's understandable. I'll be the first to admit that I do this quite a lot. I do try to avoid negative emotions because they just don't feel good. But what we forget is that having those negative emotions is half of what it means to be human. In life, we go through both the positive and the negative. And when we go through our everyday lives, especially with social media, well-intentioned as these messages might be, we're surrounded by a lot of good vibes only, or positive vibes only, or feel-good messages. And again, these might be well-intentioned, but I actually think that these are quite harmful, because that's essentially to erase, again, half of what it means to be human, which is having those negative emotions. Having negative emotions is part of life. It's authentic. It's our raw human nature. And even within the same day, even within the same hour, heck, even within the same minute, we could be feeling both at peace and anxious. We could be feeling both happy and sad. We could be feeling both relief and pain. And that, to be a human is essentially to be a living contradiction. And it doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always look good. It is messy. But if we can learn to make peace with that, and if we can learn to embrace that, then that is also where much of our magic is to be found. So a little bit about my personal story. Amy, I know that you know this very well, and some of you who might be listening who already do know me also know this. I struggle with anxiety and depression, and I've struggled for a large proportion of my life. That being said, I have been known for the most part, and I think all of my friends and loved ones can attest to this, that for the most part, I am also known to have a positive demeanor. And in my book, the two of those don't have to be mutually exclusive. The reason that I got into the work that I do is because of my personal struggles with anxiety and a lot of the societal stigma surrounding anxiety. And so that, I've gone through some experience that at the time have been traumatic, but have in fact helped propel me to do the work that I do today, both personally and professionally. And so the book is largely based on my own experiences, but what it is a collection of love letters to all of life emotions, both the positive and the negative. So the book includes 61 poems, each of which is structured as a love letter to a different emotion. And it has the whole range of emotions. So it has anxiety and depression. It also has bliss and excitement. It has amusement. It has passion. It has perfection, anxiety, relief, and everything in between and beyond. And the whole message that I'm trying to get across is that, no, these negative emotions don't feel good, but they are a part of our life. They're a part of who we are. They're essentially part of the story that make us who we are today. And if we can learn, and oftentimes when we have those negative emotions, they're usually serving some sort of purpose at a particular point in our life. And so if we can learn to uncover what that purpose might be, if we can learn to have a conversation with those negative emotions and understand what role it's trying to play in our life, what it's trying to tell us, if we can learn to see the light and the lessons in those negative emotions, that I believe sets us up for much more positive mental health than completely avoiding negative emotions and pushing them under the rug. Because in the long term, I believe that actually leads to much greater pathologies, whether that be somatic or emotional, that actually ends up hindering our mental health rather than helping it. So how does this relate to love? How does this relate to self-care? I think a lot of times when people hear the word self-care, they're quick to think of things like going on luxurious vacations, or going to get pampered at a spa, or spending time on the couch with Netflix and popcorn. All great things. I love those things. I personally do all of those things. What we don't oftentimes remember is that self-care is such a layered process, and it's not always pretty. What you see at the spas and at the luxurious resorts and, on the couch with your Netflix and popcorn are kind of the tip of the iceberg. And I'm not by any means discouraging anybody from doing these things, but part of self-care, part of loving yourself, means loving all of yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It means learning to have conversations with those parts of yourself that you might not like in order to become a better person, both for yourself and for others. It involves meeting yourself where you're at, having grace with yourself, recognizing that it's totally okay not to feel okay. And I'll be the first to admit, I am going through some stuff right now, and I'm definitely not feeling my best. And I'm not afraid to share that with everybody, because that's part of my story. And I don't want to hide that. I don't want to hide that from myself or from others. I'm not doing so great right now, but in that I'm learning to have grace with myself and be very patient with myself and meet myself where I am. If that includes taking a break from work, taking some extra time to rest, if that includes letting my colleagues and friends know that, hey, I'm not at my best right now, be a little bit more patient with me this week or this month or this couple of weeks, then that's okay. And that's what that's how I'm showing myself so a little bit of extra love. So bringing it back to the book, every poem is a love letter to a different emotion, both positive and negative. For those of you who have read the book or who will read the book, you'll also come to appreciate that not every positive emotion is 100% positive and not every negative emotion is 100% negative. There are positive within the negatives and negatives within the positives. And that is essentially the contradiction and the mess that is to be human. That is also the beauty and the magic that it is to be human.
That is just such a beautiful conversation to have with everyone, I believe. I think that the conversations, as you pointed out, are so much targeted in the positive, happy, happy, joy, joy, which is, there is a place for that. But I do believe in extremes, and sometimes we can go to that extreme to such degree that we're almost afraid to show how we're really feeling in a day. And I think there's a message too in the workplace sometimes that you can't show emotion because that is not professional. And so if we can have these conversations aloud, we can have better conversations. And I love what you said. You said, I can reach out to my colleagues and say, you know, just if you could you be a little more patient this week, that, you know, going through some things. I think just speaking that really builds a better culture in the workplace, that alone. But also, again, it's demonstrating the kind of self-love that you're talking about, which is really all about, you know, connection with your emotional self, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I know for me, Pavita, for years, I grew up and I was known as the overly sensitive, overly emotional kid in my bunch. And, you know, nothing against my family. I'm just saying that we all know, we grow up and we have these certain ways that we perceive things and we hear things, and then we absorb them and they become our personal labels for a while. And so what happened with me was I was then afraid to express certain emotions, and even got to the point where I had shame and guilt attached to these negative emotions that were quite real for me. There was a lot of dysfunction at times in my family, and I was responding to that with anger, with crying, with tears, and not having my family not having the tools and me not having the tools. It led to me having this very, like you say, it turned into a pathological situation where I was now faking it. I was suppressing my emotions. And the way that I came through that, and you'll be interested to hear this, I went to my first round of therapy in my early adulthood. And my therapist actually had me write letters to my emotions. And when your book came out, I thought, this is so overdue. It's such a beautiful thing, because I already had the power of knowledge and experience, having done that exercise in that time of my life, to really bring out the realness in me again. And when I read your book, I was looking at things, and I wrote down some of the core emotions that I was reminded of. Frustration. You have a beautiful poem about frustration. Jealousy. So if you're out there and you're feeling any jealousy or fear, or courage being a more positive, it can be both negative and positive, right? Courage can be scary, scary, scary negative, or really, really compelling you towards something really, really great. But your relationship with that, writing a letter to courage. I want to ask my listeners, what would you say? What would you say in your own letter to courage today? And the one that stuck out for me too was growth, Pavita. You had a letter to growth. And I want you to speak to that a little bit, because as I told my story just a minute ago, part of that accessing that or having access to that exercise to write a letter to my emotions, that was a painful process. And at the same time, it was required in order for me to have the growth to become my more authentic self in the good, bad, and ugly. So could you speak to us a little bit about, and maybe even read your poem about growth, and then talk to us about how we can maybe write our own letter to ourselves?
Absolutely. So, to growth, and some of the poems are actually illustrated. So,
Beautiful.
to growth, I am terrified of you. Often I hate you. Like a nagging parent, you say you know what's best for me. I don't want to admit it, but sometimes, only sometimes, you're right. The world is always changing, and you make me change with it. It hurts. You are a sadist taking pleasure in my pain, but you often produce astonishing results, like coal becoming a diamond, or a caterpillar becoming a chrysalis, becoming a butterfly. You force me to constantly learn and evolve, to become even slightly better than I was yesterday. But you work in strange ways, because sometimes getting better means getting worse, and getting worse means getting better. You always demand more of me, like I'm your slave. I am your canvas, your work in progress, never reaching perfection, yet somehow always enough. Thank you, growth. Love, me.
I love that.
Thank
You know
you.
what I love about each poem is that you thank each emotion. You say, thank you, love me. And it's something we're not used to saying, is it? We don't necessarily thank what's happening to us. And so I think that's a really powerful message that you have. And I love how you begin it with, I'm terrified of you. And isn't it true? And I'll ask my listeners, how many of you feel scared when you have to make a change, or maybe you're not even necessarily sure you have to make a change, but a change is coming. You feel something and it's scary and it's terrifying. And what did you say? It's like you're like a slave to it. It's just it's this thing. But again, it's a necessary bit of information for us to grab onto, to absorb, and then move through like the butterfly. And growth just really stood out for me because we're in the personal development world together as well as everything else you do. And you're always growing and learning. And I feel so fortunate to be able to learn and grow along with you. And I can see this message becoming so much bigger over time. I'm hopeful that we can move both into the positive and the negative as something that works in together in sort of a dance. So I asked at the beginning, how many of you work to avoid negative emotions? And I shared with you briefly about how I was running away from my emotions because I felt ashamed. I felt a little guilty for having certain feelings and for exploding at times. And I know, Pavita, you said you were going through a tough time, or you are right now. And are there any letters right now that you turn to in your book, or any new ones that you maybe have been writing for yourself that have helped you become more aligned with what's happening to you versus out into chaos land?
Quite a few. So anxiety is very high for me right now. So I would be happy to read that one as well.
Please
but
do.
Because as you'll see from the poem, my struggle is part of my strength. So, dear anxiety, what a relationship we have. Over the decades, I filed some restraining orders against you. Klonopin, Prozac, Ativan, Xanax, Zoloft, Ashwagandha, Reiki, meditation, kirtan, yoga, therapy, love. What can I say? Sometimes you are necessary in order for me to perform. You give me drive and sometimes work to keep me alive. But like me, you can be intense and stubborn. You break me down and wake me up from my sleep with pain in my chest, heaviness in my gut, and throbbing in my temples. You make me struggle to breathe and anticipate the worst. When you are around, I am easily irritated by all stimuli and ready to scream and cry. But I am tougher than you, and I force myself to make it through. You are a terrifying, most troublesome feeling. I can't always control when you come and go, but usually you teach me something when you're here. Decades with you has given me no option but to learn to cope with your presence. I can't say I like you much, but you are part of my story and you're part of my strength. So for that, thank you, anxiety. Love me. So with that, there's also another poem that has definitely been doing a lot for me lately, To Exhaustion. And this is actually one of my favorites.
Yes, mine too. Yes, I forgot to mention that one.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're reading it.
Dear Exhaustion, you are at once glorified and frowned upon, but honestly, I find you quite pleasant and welcome you. You force me to rest, one of my favorite things to do, and ensure that I get a restorative slumber and a fresh start. You bring needed endings and new beginnings. You are an invited pause, a reset button that everyone needs. You are the reminder that we can't keep going without also stopping. So please come anytime. Thank you, Exhaustion. Love me. And then one more that I'll read.
Great.
To Laziness. Dear Laziness, you don't let me get a whole lot done for no other reason than just not wanting to. You extinguish the burning flame inside me, unplugging my power, turning me into an object at rest that wants to stay at rest, at least for some time. For many years, I was conditioned to think otherwise, but you have taught me that this is okay. I don't feel like it, at least not now, is a perfectly valid excuse, according to you. I could do nothing and I'd still be alive. The things that I do not define me. My output is not my value. Rather, the contents of my heart and soul are my essence. Sometimes it is nice to simply be. That too is living. So how could that not be productive? Thank you, Laziness. Love me. And I know I said that would be my last one, but I actually do want to read one more just because this is what I'm hoping to get to at some point.
Absolutely.
To Peace.
Ah, yes. Yes.
Dear Peace, we need more of you in the world, and I need more of you in my life. To spend just a minute with you is a blessing. When you are around, my deep inhales and exhales imitate the ebbs and flows of the ocean waves. It is a moment in which I am free of worry, and everyone gets along. You create a mosaic of diverse pieces coming together to create something even richer, even more beautiful than the sum of its parts, a true work of art. Thank you, Peace. Love me.
So how many of you can relate to the letter that Pavita read to anxiety? Or maybe you're the person who exhaustion, something sparked you when she read about her letter to exhaustion. I was tuned into when you said, my contents of my heart and soul is my essence. And I believe before that, you said it is not what I do that defines me. Going by memory here of what you just said. So yeah, when we think about that, how many times do we expend so much energy and put so much value on what we're doing in this moment and how we're doing this and that, and everything from our work to our relationships. But it's sort of that in itself is exhausting. But when we can look at it as exhaustion being the contents of your heart and soul as your essence, it's part of living, right? It's part of what we experience in life. And if we can look at it that way, then our obstacle becomes also our opportunity to just look at it and thank it as you have. And when it comes to peace, I love how you ended on that letter in your series here, because that is, of course, where we all want to to be. We want to be in a centered, peaceful state as often as we can. And I think that's really important for us to remind ourselves that peace is not something that is continuous. It is not something that we should seek and then we get, and then it is at the end and that's it. And I know you've read my book a couple of times because you were my editor, and I talk about this journey toward peace. And when you get to the end of that pyramid, so to speak, it isn't the end. What it is the beginning of your more positive relationship with that peaceful lifestyle that you want to attain through all the uncertainty, through all the fears, through all the doubts and disappointments. And so I really appreciate you landing on that, because it is like the ebbs and flows of the ocean waves, right? And it does have diverse pieces, and it is truly a work of art when we can experience more of that. And, my heart's with you. I know we have difficult times right now, and I know you're dealing with your issue. I am as well. And I had a momentary headstrong experience with anger last week, and twice, as a matter of fact. And I want to point this out because it doesn't matter the tools we have and the this and the that, and I'm the stress management person or mastery coach, and I'm all this. It is about me reminding people that when we hit those real emotions and they're presenting or they're expressing in ways that we may not feel the best about, but they're there anyway, okay, the good and the ugly parts, right? Like you say, when they're out there, these are our opportunities to look at it as that lesson, that new lesson for us. And what I found myself doing, Pavita, I give credit to your book, because I went that night after I had my first explosion, and this was at another person. I went in my journal and I was writing, and I thought, oh, I'm going to write my letter to anger today. And I did, and it wasn't in poet form or poem form or anything, but it was just my sort of blurb on it. And it really helped me clear some things out for myself and help me understand how it was I actually went from being really silent about how I felt to blowing up at someone, which wasn't pretty. And it did not respect that other person. And it didn't add to this, it didn't lower the stress to the already stressful situation. After that, I said to myself, okay, I'm all over this. I'm going to be fine. I'm not going to allow this to happen again. And I think 2 days later, I exploded again. And, and what I want to point out here is that my old self would have been ashamed or felt guilty. Instead, what I did was I went inside and wrote my letter again to anger, and really just kind of worked with it a little bit and said to myself, okay, I'm not ashamed. I'm certainly not happy with how I reacted, but what can I do differently now in this new, what is this anger telling me? What is it speaking to me? Why do I feel this way? What led me to this point? So being more introspective, I think, is just really important for us to do as a lifelong exercise. And I think this book is timeless in carrying us through those moments when we're like, hey, oh my gosh, I'm wicked jealous of her over there. I can't stop these feelings. And looking to your book for that letter and just seeing a little different perspective about how jealousy can work in your life, but also writing your own letter to every emotion, whether positive or negative. And more importantly, thanking it as you did, thank you, love me, is really a form of self-care and self-love, but also an extension to caring for others. And that's why I so appreciate your book. And I hope that my listeners will get this book. Please tell them right now where they can order it.
Yeah, so you can order it at magicwithpavita.com. So magic with Pavita.com. A note about the book. So a portion of the proceeds will go to my nonprofit, Girls Health Ed. So you would be supporting not only me as an author, but the health, happiness, and well-being of girls and young women all over the world, which would be amazing. And you will get a personally autographed note from me. It'll come to you in a bright pink envelope filled with love from New York City. We have Valentine's Day coming up. Quite frankly, I think Valentine's Day is a bit of an overrated holiday.
Me too.
celebrated the way that it traditionally is.
Yes.
And I know I gave all of this talk about, the multiple layers of love and self-love, but Valentine's Day is coming up, and let's face it, sometimes romantic love and lust are fun. So on that note, I'm just gonna read one of my favorite poems, To Lust.
Nice.
Dear Lust, you make it so fun to be alive. In fact, you are one of the reasons I am even alive in the first place. I love how you bring out my primal nature and make me shiver and my hairs rise at the touch of another. I relish at the way you send pulsating vibrations through all my cells, causing me to lose all control when our bodies collide, inciting an internal explosion, an exchange of energy, a rush in dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, an interaction so intense that the stars stare from the sky in awe. Thank you, Lust. Love me.
Beautiful. I have the chills.
Exactly. So
Great.
I thank you so much for allowing me to be on this podcast, Amy. And my message to everybody is, in the spirit of loving not only romantic partners, which Valentine's Day certainly tends to glorify, and which a lot of us tend to glorify in our day-to-day lives, let's just love each other. Try to be empathetic to one another, just a little bit more empathetic than you would be, because everybody is going through something. Maybe they don't know that they're going through something, but sometimes, and let's also just try not to judge people so harshly, because everybody is going through something and we might not know the full story. But if I would encourage you to ask, if something is happening and you don't quite understand why, ask. Sometimes that's really what somebody needs. And people want to be heard, people want to be listened to, people want to be empathized with. Don't be so quick to judge people or to give advice, but just listen, offer yourself. And I think that's the best thing that we can do for ourselves this coming Valentine's Day and forever.
Oh, thank you so much, Pavita. It is my true pleasure to have you on, and I hope to have you again as my guest in the future. I love having these conversations, and I know they'll be helpful for so many people. And you haven't met Pavita before, she is the sparkle and she's wonderful. So please pick up her book. Again, as Pavita said, life's about the ebb and flow, and it's about the good, bad, and ugly. And when we can learn to live in higher vibration and relationship with those things, we become better masters at redefining our struggle. So thanks so much. I'll see you next time.